Evening, Raymond.
Hello, David. How are you?
Oh God, I'm so excited. I know I'm not alone in this. I'm so excited that we're getting not just a novel about Felix Leiter, but that it's being written by you.
Well, thank you very much. I've been sitting on this since May of 2024. That's when we first started working on it. And my urge to let the world know about it has been so strong. I've been bursting at the seams, and finally we got it announced. So
Well, funny you say that because I remember us meeting back in, I think it was October, November time. We had brunch
November. It was
November.
November.
We had brunch together in London in November. And you told me then, which was very cruel, Raymond, you told me then that there was something you couldn't tell me about, but there was definitely something. And I was like, that's the worst thing you could possibly do. So six
Well,
months
you
down,
knew I'd
yeah.
had a meeting at Ian Fleming Publications,
I
so
I did, and I was starting to put ideas together in my head, but I've learned now to not do that because if you sort of put your if you do hope for, you know, I'm always a little bit kind of two glass half full about these things. And I must admit, the thought that you writing a new entire novel in the Bond universe was one of those thoughts that went through my head. But then I just shoved that thought away and I thought, this isn't going to happen. So just stop thinking about that. And I thought, is it going to be re-releases? Is it, I don't know what it's going to be. So when this news actually hit, I think I was tipped off a couple of days before it went public with everyone else. I was like, oh my god, I just want to tell everybody now this news. And I suspected it would have a positive reaction with the fan community, but I underestimated quite how positive the reaction was going to be. I imagine there's all this talk of spin-offs and stuff at the moment, and I imagine it's there's a degree of trepidation sometimes about these things, and you think, how's this going to go down? But I take it you've seen some of the comments online because I haven't seen
yes, I
a single negative word.
right, exactly. No, I mean, if you're gonna talk about spinoffs, I would think Felix Leiter's a no-brainer.
Well, you say that, but someone had to come up with the idea, Raymond, and I understand that was actually you.
It was. I was, I've always wanted to do a Leiter book. I think I first proposed it sometime in the mid 2000s.
Mm.
And, IFP just, they were doing other things. They weren't ready for that kind of thing yet. And they just kind of put me off. I mean, nicely. Uh, and I think I suggested it again about 5 or 6 years later. And same thing. They were just, that it wasn't in their plans. But finally, over the last year or two, it seemed to be a much more viable kind of thing. So I did pitch it to Simon, and he was very enthusiastic, bless his heart. And I then did he said yes, do a proposal, and I did a proposal with a minor sort of outline of what the plot might be, and they went for it. So I wrote the book over the summer, finished it around in September, I guess, and then it went to Simon, and we did an editing, cutting room floor process, and got it ship shape, and then it went to the board of directors, the IFP board of directors in December, and we got their verdicts in January, and from then on it's been, okay, now how do we do this? Also, IFP wanted to experiment with their website and the rollout. They wanted to do a serial. That was kind of in their thoughts to
Mm.
begin with. And I think I came up, I said, Simon, why don't, we could do a serial if you'd like. And he went, well, that's a good, yeah. And so that's how kind of that thought process went.
Wow.
So yes, it's going to be an online serial for everybody who reads ebooks, hopefully, and that'll last throughout the summer, and then finally at the end in October, we'll get you can get the the printed book.
So before we get stuck into the nitty gritty of Felix Leiter, which is something I know you and I have been kind of very eager to have an extended chat about how he compares in the books and the films, why people love the character so much. And we're not going to do any spoilers for the story. Certainly, I don't want any spoilers. I really want my first reading of this. I'm sure it's bound to be a brilliant book, to be untouched by spoilers. But let's just make sure that everyone knows, the logistics of this. So, am I right in saying it's 10 installments that are going to be released starting incrementally from May the 27th? That's correct, yeah?
Yes, yes. So there'll be episodes, and each episode
Yeah.
contains several chapters of the book.
Okay. And there is actually going to be a paperback edition of the full story released, and that's at the start of October the 2nd.
That's what I understand.
Yeah. And I think it's such a genius move to do it for this particular project. Obviously, not having read the story, but having read the synopsis, which you might want to unpack a little bit in just a second. But having certainly read the synopsis, and I'm a massive fan of that genre, the pulp fiction genre. It just seems to be such a natural fit with that release format.
Well, I would think so, but it's also the time period that it fits
Mm.
in very well. I've said it in Fleming's timeline, between his novels Live and Let Die and Moonraker. I mean, Diamonds Are Forever. So it's
Mm.
kind of taken place during Moonraker.
Mm.
And those are, Felix is in Live and Let Die, and that, of course, he has his shark incident in that book, and then he doesn't appear again until Diamonds Are Forever, and he has his prosthesis.
Mm.
And so, my story will fill in those gaps of, what happened to him after the shark attack. How did he, adapt with rehabilitation and everything? And then, the whole CIA firing that we know about from the books, and that he joined Pinkertons,
Mm.
the detective service. So when Diamonds Are Forever starts, he's already a member of employee of Pinkertons.
Mm.
So my book goes into that, and it's basically his first big job at Pinkertons. So
I know after I WhatsApped you when I first heard the news, you did say, and again, you're so bad at this, Raymond. You said, and you particularly will really enjoy it, and I was like, oh, what does that possibly mean? And there are so many again possibilities blowing up inside my head about why I particularly might like this story. I mean, for a start, this might be what you're referring to. It might be something else entirely. I don't know. I have no idea. But I've always been fascinated by Felix as a character from Live and Let Die onwards. Obviously before then, but particularly Live and Let Die onwards, because you have at the center of Bond's world, and he appears in 6 of the novels, so half of the novels. And for 4 of those, you've essentially got a main character, someone who Bond is actually close to, and there's not many people you can say that about, who's a disabled character. And
yes,
a lot of people accuse Fleming of being disablist, if that's the correct word. And obviously, you've got the villains who often have scars and various forms of disability. But then, actually, one of the main, I think a lot of people overlook the fact that James Bond has a big scar down his face in the novels, and also that that Felix Leiter is a disabled character, and that's never something that's overlooked by Fleming. And in fact, a lot of the continuation authors have tackled that as well. So I've always found that a really interesting element of the character.
well, yeah, it's I think it's an integral part of his character,
Mm.
especially from Diamonds Are Forever onwards. And uh, the films have never portrayed him
No.
without a hand or part of his leg. We had the shark attack in License to Kill, but after that, we never had Felix with a prosthesis. Another interesting thing, Fleming never really describes the prosthesis. He just says it's a hook, and when I was a kid, I was imagining like a pirate hook. which is not it. It's really a pincher kind of thing. Maybe you're familiar with the movie The Best Years of Our Lives.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but
From
I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was an actor named Harold Russell who really did lose both arms in the
Mm.
war, and he has these prostheses. And he won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for that role, as well as an honorary Oscar the same year. So
Wow.
he won 2 Oscars that year. But that's the kind of prosthesis Felix has,
Mm.
because it's just a few years after that. The early 50s. It would be the same type of thing that he would get from the VA. So
Mm.
I did, all the research. I talked to a prosthesis doctor and everything. He went through it all with me. So, Fleming never really describes how it works, how he's able to
No.
grasp things or anything like that. So I go into that, how difficult it was to learn how to do it, because it's all done with your shoulders.
Oh,
It's
really?
all oh yeah, it's all a pulley kind of thing, where any kind of movement you make with the arm is done with a shoulder flexion.
Wow.
So lifting your arm, opening the pincher, locking the arm in place, raising lower. It's all done doing various movements.
That does not
And
sound easy.
no, it doesn't. And you have to go through a lot of therapy to do it, to
Wow.
learn how to do it. Yeah.
So, I mean,
Just to put on the harness, it takes Felix a week to master putting on the harness by himself.
wow.
You have to be able to do it by yourself. So,
And
um,
without treading into spoiler territory, is that something that you do write about in this book?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Wow.
yeah. Um, Another thing that's very, I think, different from the films. You got it in a couple of places, in a couple of the characters. I don't want to criticize any of the actors. The actors, I love the
Yeah.
actors. I love Felix in the movies. Let's get that out of the way,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know. But I really don't believe that the Felix we've seen in the movies is Fleming's Felix Leiter
No,
ever.
no.
We've never had him. The closest to me to Fleming's Felix is Rick Van Nutter,
Mm.
both in looks and mostly in attitude too, especially looks. I mean, he
Mm.
is tall. He has blonde hair.
Hmm.
He's the only one of all the actors who fits that bill.
Mm.
Um, One thing Felix is not is deadly serious.
Mm.
He's always buoyant, jovial, a kidder. He's a happy-go-lucky guy, even despite his disability. Just read Diamonds Are Forever. I mean, yeah, Bond kind of notes, well, he has a little hesitancy about him, but throughout the book, Felix is like the guide in New York. Come on, we're going to go eat there. We're going to do this. We're going to drink ourselves crazy. Live and let die. We're going to go up to Harlem and hit the clubs, and he tells them all about jazz, and he's almost like he's mansplaining America to Bond in all the books. Read Thunderball, man. He's just going on and on about the food and the drinks and just being an entertainer. He's a joker. He's kind of a goofball in many,
Mm.
many ways. He's a smart goofball, but he he's often described as having a boyish grin, and that
Mm.
says a lot about him.
Mm.
He's just a likable, personable guy. He's never this sort of serious, Jack Lord, or I mean, I love Jeffrey Wright, but Jeffrey Wright was very serious in his
Mm.
playing of
Mm.
Felix. That's not Felix,
No,
you
you're
know,
right.
you know.
You're so right, and I'm kind of replaying in my head both all the film versions and the book versions, and I totally agree. Felix is the one who tries to get Bond to live a little. I mean, he even says that in the film version, David Hedison's first appearance in Live and Let Die, after Roger Moore says, "I once had a nasty turn in a booth," and then orders the Sazeracs, and he's like, "Come on, we're in New Orleans, James." There are elements of the book lighter in some of the performances, but it's never really. I totally agree, and I love the Jeffrey Wright performance as well. But
Yeah,
it's never all really come together for me. So yeah, and that probably that's because I saw Felix on film first. I think I saw Goldfinger first, and then obviously
yeah.
Felix is in that. But yeah, he's pretty. I suppose he's a bit straight-laced in that. He does make the joke towards the end as Bond's getting on the
Right.
plane
Well,
about,
C. Slender
mm,
in Goldfinger, he doesn't look like
no, not at all.
Fleming's
No,
Leiter at
no,
all,
no, no.
but he does kind of have that
Mm,
levity. He's always going, "Well, that's my James," and
yeah,
yeah, and it's, you know,
yeah.
he's always kind of got a
Mm.
smile on his face all the way through the movie, like he's just having a good time. So there is a little bit in C. Slender. He's just not perfect. I don't know. I would love to see, Felix done with the
Yeah,
prosthesis,
yeah.
and so anyway,
It's
anyway,
funny that you've set it straight after Diamonds Are Forever. No, sorry, before Diamonds Are Forever, because um, Diamonds Are Forever, really, I always think there's not really a book without Felix Leiter in Diamonds Are Forever. I think, and there's no such thing as a bad Ian Fleming book, but Diamonds Are Forever often appears down the list of people's rankings.
yeah,
And I love lots about it. I do, the story is not necessarily the most brilliant, but the characterization of Felix Leiter is one of the real highlights for me. And it's the
I agree.
relationship that he and Bond have throughout the whole novel. It's almost like, and I have characterized it as almost like Bond and Felix go on holiday, is what Diamonds Are Forever feels like to me. And it's that relationship is the novel for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's a lot of that in Thunderball as well.
Yeah,
Without Felix, that would have been there would have been something missing.
yeah.
Let's put it that way.
And Felix Leiter, I'm sure most people listening to this already know this, but he was named after, Tommy Leiter or Marion Oates Leiter, depending on which one of that married couple is. It depends which source you read. But that's where the Leiter came from, the surname. The Felix came from his Fleming's best friend's middle name, Ivor Bryce. So, and when you read any biography of Fleming and the relationship that Fleming has with Ivor Bryce, it always strikes me as being a little bit. It's not a one for one, but it always strikes me as being their relationship was the inspiration for the relationship between James and Felix in some ways.
Yeah. I've always wondered, did Fleming really know a Texan? Because
Mm,
Felix Leiter is
mm,
a Texan. I don't know if Tommy Leiter or Marion Leiter was from Texas. I'm not
no.
sure. But
Do you think that
I
might be
wonder if there was
because
someone.
do you think Fleming went for Texas because Texas was like the most American of thing he could possibly think about? And I'm very aware that I'm talking to someone who grew up in Texas. So no offense
Yes, I
intended
did.
by that, Raymond.
Well, I was born in Texas and I grew up in Texas and went to college in Texas, but then I left Texas. Then I, went up north. I moved to New York City and lived there for many years. Now I live in the Chicago area. So, but I still visit, Texas. I still have family members down there. Um, but yeah, it's in my blood. You put a couple of beers in me, you'll hear a Texas drawl slightly. But, I studied theater, so it really drilled out the heavy Texas accent.
Okay, well, I look
And I
forward
don't think,
to
the same is true of Felix Leiter.
yeah,
He would not have a heavy Texas drawl like a
right.
cowboy. He would have just a slight accent, a slight Southern accent, because he left Texas. He lived in Washington, D.C. He lived in France.
Mm.
He lived overseas. He was in the CIA, and then now he lives in New York City. So his drawl, again, like mine, probably comes out if he's had a few drinks.
Well, I look forward to having a couple of drinks next time you're in London, Raymond, and we'll put that one to the test.
All right.
I am a linguist by training, but I am terrible at identifying accents. But I couldn't help notice as you were talking about Texan things then that it was definitely coming through more.
Well, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Do you think there is something recognized? Do you think Fleming did really kind of do his research on what Texans were like? Do you think there is something recognizably Texan about Felix?
Well, there is that great line in Casino Royale. He says, um, generally, well, so I'm paraphrasing something about, some of the best Americans come from Texas. In
Mm,
his experience, there is a line like that right after he meets Felix Leiter.
mm,
Um, so, where did he get that? I don't know, but
mm. There are
hey,
some
I'll
people
I'll
who
take it.
there are some people who say that it was obviously intended to represent the special relationship. A lot of cultural historians have pointed this out, that it's supposed to represent Bond's the UK-US special relationship. It's interesting. I always find in the books, perhaps with the exception of the finale of Thunderball, that almost universally, Felix is placed in something of subordinate position to Bond, which
Well,
is kind of unrealistic in real life when those books were set, because America was obviously, on top and Britain wasn't. But obviously, the Bond books kind of play into a bit of a wish fulfillment fantasy for British readers. So, what do you make of that?
no, I think you're right. I mean, Fleming really was elevating, a new British hero
Mm,
in a time period after the war, post-war, that where Britain was third place.
yeah.
So that's by design, you know.
Mm,
Um, And I think that's true of all the allies that appear in the Fleming books, not just Felix, but also Tanaka and Karam and
mm,
everybody. They're always in a sort of, but they're also this important sort of mansplainer of the culture of
culture.
wherever they are, and
Mm.
the guide, and we're going to do this now, and we're going to go here. This, well, we're going to feed you this, and you're going to love it,
And
and stuff like that.
yeah, and it reveals itself in quite small ways sometimes, like in Casino Royale when he orders the famous martini for the first time. Leiter's the one who's saying, "Oh, that's a strong drink."
Yeah,
A very different
exactly.
reaction from the film, because Felix Leiter is like, "I'll have one of those. Keep the fruit." He's not even jovial enough to keep the lemon peel in the film adaptation, but in the book, he's almost like, "Whoa, James, that's a heck of a drink." It's almost like Fleming saying British people can drink more than Americans. And apart from me, I don't know how many British people you know quite well, but there may be a bit of truth in not. I'm not saying that we can drink more, but I think British people would like to think we could drink more than Americans.
Well, probably personally, in my experience, that's true. But a lot of the relationship in the books between Bond and Felix is drinking.
Yeah.
They're boy, they put him back
Mm-hmm.
in those books, and I'm sure that was true of Fleming and Ernest Cuneo,
Mm-hmm.
or Fleming and Ivor Bryce, or any of his good friends. They loved to drink, and it was just part of their culture and what people did.
And something that I'd actually forgotten, or it was locked away in the dim recesses of my mind, and then sprang back when I was doing a little bit of research a couple of days ago, was that it's actually an American we have to thank for Felix Leiter's life being saved at the end of Live and Let Die, isn't it? So it wasn't it Fleming's American agent who basically read the manuscript of Live and Let Die, and she was like, "Why are you killing this guy off? He's really interesting and obviously a way in for a lot of American readers."
Yeah, Naomi Burton.
Yeah.
She was the agent in England, no, in America,
Mm.
and he killed Felix in Live and Let
Mm.
Die in the original
Mm.
manuscript, and she said, "I think you should keep him around. We like him."
Mm.
And he thought about that, and he decided to save him. That's true. That's very true.
So your novel picks up, just to talk about the story, and there's kind of vague, unspoilerish outline
Right.
we possibly can. So
Right.
your
Yeah.
story picks up immediately after then.
The beginning of the book, we learn how he went through rehabilitation and was fitted with prosthesis. This is all down in Florida still.
Mm,
And then he goes back to New York, where he was when he got put on the live and let die case.
mm,
He had moved to New York from Washington, D.C.
mm.
Um, I kind of cover the timeline that Fleming had. When Bond first meets him in Casino Royale, Leiter's based in Paris. And then in Live and Let Die, he says, "Well, they moved me back to Washington for a little while, but now I'm up here." So he has an apartment in Greenwich Village, and it was kept intact for him while he was recovering down in Florida. And he goes back, and we'll find out that the CIA can't use him anymore because of his. They offer him a desk job, and he says no, and then he gets the job at Pinkerton's.
Mm.
And then we get into the story. And as the tagline, one of the taglines of the announcement said, it's a mystery, it's a romance, it's a spy story, it's a road trip tale, and it's a postcard to a lost Americana.
Wow.
And that really sums it up. It's takes place in 1952,
Hmm.
and I want to talk about that for a minute. People will go, well, those books were published, 1954, 55, 56. I used, maybe you're familiar with John Griswold's
Yeah,
book,
the
the
chronology book. Yeah.
chronologies and the annotations.
Yeah.
He used a lot of very clever deductions in pinpointing when in the real world these books would have actually taken place. And Live and Let Die takes place in January, February of 1952.
Hmm.
And the shark attack actually at the very end of January. So, and then Moonraker takes place in like spring of 53. And then Diamonds Are Forever is late summer of 53.
Mm.
So there's a whole year and a half between the shark attack and Felix's appearance in Diamonds Are Forever. So what
Wow.
happened during that year and a half?
Hmm.
My story takes place mostly in the second half of 1952.
Okay. Okay.
And there are some real world events that play into the plot that I wanted to include. So I was very fortunate that it was 1952. So I made that work. Um,
I'm
I
now
think I
going
can.
through in my head what I know about 1952, and I know
Yeah,
lots of
yeah,
people,
right.
after they've listened to this, will be
Yeah,
frantically Googling historical
right,
events from
right.
1952. That's if they do want any kind of spoilers. I'll see what mood I'm in once we've finished recording, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to resist doing that, Raymond.
Right. I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you what the locations are, is it?
I don't believe so. It's
Well,
entirely up to you.
we start off in New York City,
Okay.
and there's a good third of the book in New York, and then we take a road trip across America.
Wow.
Felix is very into cars,
Mm.
and there's a road trip that goes from New York all the way to Texas.
Hmm.
And so the last third is mostly in Texas and New Mexico.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wild West territory, potentially.
Pretty much back then, it was pretty Wild West.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And you,
especially West Texas.
right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, now you've whetted my appetite even more, Raymond, because you know how much I love Western films, full stop as well. So anything set in that location. In fact, on my honeymoon, our honeymoon, it takes two. So Anthony and my honeymoon, we actually took a train across the US and we went from New Orleans to Los Angeles and then spent some time in California. But a whole day of that train journey was going through that Texas landscape because you only realize how big Texas is when you're traveling through it. So for 24 hours, just flat everywhere. Well, yeah, just an incredible landscape. So spending time fictionally in that landscape does excite me, I'll be honest.
Right. Well, there are no horses.
Okay, no horses.
So,
I can live
no
without
horses.
horses.
Nope.
There might be the odd train in the background, but at least we've got some cool cars.
Yeah. Yeah. There's several cool cars. Yeah.
Okay, and again, we many of us know how much you love cars. So
Well, I'm not a big car enthusiast. I had to go to a friend of mine who's an expert on, okay, what kind of good cars would be good. There's the famous Studelac,
yeah.
from Diamonds of Forever. Well, Felix doesn't acquire the Studelac until 1953
Ah, okay.
because that's when they started making them.
Oh,
But we have a scene in which Felix orders one. He
ah,
actually, I tracked down the actual dealer that converted the Studebakers with the Cadillac engines. The guy who actually made them,
wow.
and he had a dealership in Long Island, in Rockville Center, and they started being made in early 1953. So the Studelac does get mentioned, and you know, Felix is salivating about it.
Okay. Well, you've got lots of us salivating about so many elements of the book. And one thing that I've kind of been thinking about since this announcement, especially after our last chat, was when you said you were writing your Bond novels previously. You sort of cast actors in different roles. Did that come in this time?
Well, I have a couple of guys that, yeah, if they're casting Felix again, I kind of know who I'd want to try who, especially if he was in the lead role. If it was like a Felix movie or a Felix TV show, yeah, I have
You never
guys in
know.
mind, but I don't know if I should really say. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know if that's really a good idea
May,
to do.
maybe hold that one back for now. Let's just
Yeah.
see how it pans out. But perhaps I'm sure many of us will now be going in through in our heads about who that may have been.
Just, it's got to be somebody in his 30s,
Okay.
blonde hair,
Hmm.
tall, fairly tall,
Hmm.
and very buoyant and
Hmm.
happy-go-lucky, and with a boyish grin, you know, uh, somebody who's very personable,
Okay.
and he's he's a good-looking guy. He's not like this, handsome,
Yeah.
uh, but I'm sure he can. He does have the hook and everything, but I think the ladies would like him anyway.
Okay.
So
And maybe some of the gentlemen as well.
true, true.
So yeah, we'll go through potential casting choices ahead. Maybe after people have read the book,
Yeah.
then maybe you reveal because that's the problem. I actually didn't want to know myself, to be honest. I don't know why I asked such a stupid question because I was like, if I know who you've got in mind as I read the book, I'm going to be picturing that actor rather than Fleming's Felix, who I've never cast as a particular actor, but yeah, just a big, handsome, blonde Texan guy. Who doesn't like that? um, that's. Is there anything else that you feel like you can impart or want to impart to viewers of this?
I don't know. It's I think also it's something that IFP really
Mm,
liked about it, and the board of directors there liked about it, is they really felt like it was right out of Fleming's universe. And
mm,
I was so pleased to hear that because I really wanted it to be
mm,
as if Ian Fleming himself suddenly adapted an American voice
mm.
and decided to write a Felix Leiter book in between Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever.
Wow.
Um, one of their comments was, "This feels like it's right out of Fleming." So, people reading it who may have not have read the Fleming books and only are familiar with the movies, they may be going, "Well, this isn't the Felix of the movies," but he's
Mm.
not. He's the Felix
Mm.
of the books. So he and oh, I can tell you this: the book is written in first person
Okay.
from his point of view.
Wow. Okay, so you may remember, I'm sure I've got nerdy about this when we've been in person, but I've said on various videos and things, and particularly when I've been chatting with Kim Sherwood, who is a fellow nerd when it comes to narrative devices. I've always wanted a Bond book in the first person. So that's another thing that I'm thinking, yes, this would be brilliant. Obviously we have The Spy Who Loved Me from the point of view of Vivian. But
I think that's the only one. I think that's
yeah.
the only continuation novel in first person.
Mhm.
So now we've
Mhm.
got another.
Wow. Okay. I'm even more excited than when we started, Raymond. Stop doing this to me. I can't take any more. Oh, no, that's brilliant.
Well,
So,
I just, I hope people like it. I think I'm sure, the hardcore Fleming fans
mm,
will hopefully like it. So, yeah. And it's a doozy of a plot. It's certainly the kind of plot I think Fleming would have written. It's got that slight toe that goes into fantasy maybe,
weirdness.
uh
Yeah.
you know, Peter Jansen Smith, who was formerly the chairman of Ian
Mm,
Fleming Publications and was Ian Fleming's literary agent. He said that Fleming would say, "I don't mind if my plots are considered improbable, as long as they're not considered impossible."
mm.
So is this plot maybe it's might be considered improbable, but it's certainly not impossible. But it's
Hey,
certainly a lot of fun.
hey, Fleming had a giant squid. A giant squid is there at that end of the spectrum. So, anything up to giant squid attack, then Bond fans will be down for it, I'm sure.
I can't wait till it's out. So.
No, you can't wait till it's out. What about us? We've got to wait.
All right.
No, thank you, Raymond. Really can't
You
wait.
bet. You bet. Thanks for having me. And it's always good to see you.